interesting people that it is my hope that we can all learn from. My guest today is a friend, a mentor, and probably the pioneer in Major League Strength Coach. He spent over 35 years with the Houston Astros. He started in the late 70s, I believe, part time with the Texas Rangers and Astros at the same time, but I'll let him tell that a little bit later. This is a guy that has been very special in my personal life and professional life. And I want to introduce to you guys Dr. Gene Coleman. Gene, you're on.
Okay. Thanks you, Jose. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been doing with everyone on the show is I want to take everyone back to the beginning of their career, some of the influences, some of their stories, their setbacks, their successes. So take me back to the beginning of your baseball career, wherever that was, whether it was a strength coach or little league player, whatever. Take me back to when you started in the game.
I started, I think, at age 10 in Little League and played through my freshman year in college. And I was teaching at the University of Texas at Austin in 1976. And I was the strength coach for basketball and the assistant strength coach for football. And I simply didn't have the gut. Cliff Gustafson asked me to help with baseball, but there wasn't enough hours in the day. And I got a call from the director of minor leagues with the Houston Astros, and he was a marathon runner. And in spring training, he decided that if he could run, 15 to 20 miles a day, that these 19 or 20-year-old kids who were there in the fall, they should be able to run 5 miles a day. And after about 2 days, they were so sore they couldn't practice. And so the general manager asked him to get some help. And he was an Aggie, so the first person he went to was the strength coach at Texas A&M, and he was retiring, and he referred him to my boss, and my boss referred him to me. And so he showed up in Austin, and we talked, and I went to spring training with the Astros minor leaguers in 76. We put together a program for their A-ball team at the plan was that we were going to work, 1 year at a time, one level at a time. And after 3 or 4 years, we would move it up to the major leagues. So I went back in 77 and again, worked with the minor leagues at the last meeting of the spring training. The general manager told me, we like what you're doing, keep it up. We fast forward to the summer, and I took the job at the University of Houston Clear Lake, moved to Houston. I got a call at breakfast. My wife picked up the paper and said the Houston Astros are 22 games out of first place at the major league level. And at noon, I got a call from the assistant GM saying that the GM wanted to meet with me. And so the next day I met with the GM, the manager, the assistant coach, and so forth. And we outlined a program. And he said, well, when can you start? And I said, well, we'll start when the season's over. And he said, no, we need you now. And I said, no, you need Oral Roberts now. You need a faith healer because you're 22 games out. And if we start today, I guarantee you we're going to finish the season 22, 23, maybe 24 games out. And when we start this program in the off season, the players are going to say, we did that and it didn't work. So fortunately, he agreed with me. There was no information on Major League Baseballs. I mean, Astros didn't even have a radar gun at the time. So one of my jobs at the University of Houston was working with NASA, and I was working with a group of astronauts, and we were testing a new group of astronauts that were coming in. So we took all the training, all the testing programs, and brought them into the Astrodome. We ran them on treadmills and measured maximal oxygen uptake and body composition and strength and so forth. And so we got a baseline of what a Major League Baseball player would look like. And from there, we designed a program. We got our equipment in. We showed the players how to use it in the last month of the season. just instruction. And then we started the program in November of 1978, and that was my start in the big leagues.
Wow. It testing has come a long way, obviously, and now every team will takes their players through some sort of testing regimen. But it's amazing to me that at that time you were that forthcoming and that ahead of the curve that you were doing testing. I mean, I remember when I started in 2002 with the Mets, any thought of testing major league players was like taboo. Even even in 2002, testing players to see what they're capable of doing, or any kind of information to design programs, that was not even spoken in 2002. And there you were in 1978 doing things like that. And you know, I know I never told you this, but I remember in 2002, that was my first year with the Mets, and before that, I had been following you. Like I wanted to get into strength and conditioning, and I was I was spending a lot of time researching the people that were in the game, people that I wanted to learn from, and I think at that time I had already bought your book just to see what kind of things you were doing, and I met you at in spring training in Port St. Lucie, and I remember you walked up to me and said hello, and I was thinking, man, this is awesome. I mean, I've always wanted to meet Gene Coleman, and then I remember the first thing I asked you was, okay, so what does Nolan do? What did Nolan do for conditioning and pitching? And so from then on, I designed all my pitching programs based on what you told me that day. You shared some of your documents, and from then on, I took that as the blueprint of what I would do with starting pitchers. And so that was my first conversation with you, and since then we've been great friends. And um, but I just wanted to bring that up because that was a very special conversation that we had back in 2002, and that's kind of was the beginning of a lifelong friendship and a lot of work together. We still work together. We still put information out there for people to learn from, and but I just wanted to bring that up. So after 78, I know that there was a time where you were doing both the Astros and Rangers. How did that come about?
Well, we were in the playoffs. It was the 5-game playoffs in 1980 against the Phillies, and 4 of those 5 games went into extra innings, and the last game went into 14 innings. We ended up losing the game in 14 innings, and so everybody was watching it on TV. And the day that after the season ended, I got a call from the former owner of the Rangers, Eddie Childs. And Eddie, I thought it was a prank, but Eddie asked me, if I wanted to become the strength coach of the Rangers. He had watched the game, and Howard Cosell was doing the game, and Eddie referred to me that he made some comment about Nolan's stamina and so forth, and attributed it to our training program. And I told him, outright, I didn't want to do it. And he said, well, um, can I talk to your general manager? And I said, sure. So anyway, he and the general manager, excuse me, he and the owner of the Astros were good friends at the time. And the next thing I know, I get a call from our general manager, who was Al Rosen at the time, and he said, "Hey, John McMullen, the owner of the Astros, wants you to work with the Rangers and the Astros, and there's going to be a meeting next week in my office, and it's going to be you, Eddie Childs, and Pat Corrales." And so we had the meeting, and the consensus was that I was going to work for both teams. Um, it was an interesting year. I didn't travel except to Arlington. So when the Rangers were in town and the Astros were out of town, I went to Arlington, and but my primary role was with the Astros. At the end of the 1981 season, Al Rosen called me in, and Nolan Ryan is calling. I've got to decline this right now. How's that
How's that for timing, huh?
for a guest appearance?
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, Al said you spent too much time with the Rangers, and I told him I didn't want to work with the Rangers to start with. That was your job, your idea. So I called Eddie Childs and told him that I'd been let go by the Astros, and he said, Nolan Ryan. He's consistent.
Yeah.
And told him that I'd been let go by the Astros, and he said, "Well, you have a job with the Rangers." So in '82, I worked with the Rangers, and halfway through the season, I got a call from Al Rosen saying, "I think we made a mistake. We'd like for you to come back at the end of the season, but you can't work for the Rangers." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I returned to the Astros and stayed there through the 2012, and then 2013. I talked to you and Nolan, and we started over with the Rangers again.
Yeah. Hey, if Nolan calls back up, pick it up. We'll get him on the call.
Okay.
Well, man, that's a interesting story. Not nowadays. You look at every team, and some teams have 2 to 3 strength coaches, and it's kind of getting to the point where trying to cover all the players, they just keep adding staff, and to think that in your time you were able to do it pretty much by yourself, because at the end of the day, the players that are going to work, and the ones that are not, they're just not going to do it. So it works itself out.
Well, I was very fortunate. My first manager, Bill Verdon, was a Marine, and Bill believed in the program. And the first day of spring training, he told the players, he said, there's going to come a time when you're going to want to walk into my office and tell me that, hey, I'm not pitching well because my arm is tired because of all the weightlifting, or I'm not running as fast, or my bat is slow because of all the weightlifting. And he said, this is the only thing that you're going to do this season that is going to have a positive effect on your performance. And before you come in my door, you need to be able to tell me that you got 8 hours of sleep for like 7 consecutive days, that you didn't go out drinking, you ate 3 meals a day. And if you can do that, my door is open. And nobody walked through his door the entire season. So he set the tone. And then we had players like Bob Watson and Cesar Cedeno and J.R. Richard who liked the program and had asked for the program, and they were big supporters of the program. And throughout my career, we always had, at least one, maybe multiple players that, were strong supporters of the program. And so I didn't have to go round somebody up, they would do it for me. That year, the first year I spent with the Rangers, they brought in a guy from the Cowboys, was a sports psychologist. And the one thing he said was, to the coaching staff, was duplicate yourself through others, which meant, set of an example, have other people, do the work for you, support you. And I bought into that. And we always had somebody, as I said, it started with Watson and Cedeno and JR, and then Nolan came in, and then we had, Caminetti and Bagwell and Biggio. And then the last one that I had, we had Hunter Pence, and then the last one that I had with the Astros was a rookie, Jose Altuve, and apparently he is still doing the job over there.
Yeah, one of the things that I admired watching from the other side when you were there is it always seemed like you had a core group of players that believed in the program, and they set the tone for the rest of the team. I remember many times you walking in the weight room with Bagwell and Biggio, and you would get to work, and it was always efficient. That they wouldn't talk, they wouldn't mess around. They would just get in and get out. And I remember that's what I want to look like when I become a head strength coach, because at that time I was the assistant with the Mets, and so every time that I would see you with those guys, I would say, that's the kind of culture that I want to promote. I want to try to find a few group of players or a few guys that believe in the program that are going to set the tone for the rest of the guys. And when I went to the Rangers, Michael Young was that guy. And when I first stepped into the job, that's what I wanted to emulate. I wanted to emulate what you were doing with the Astros, and it's to have that Bagwell Biggio uh, duo be the guys that set the tone in the weight room. And so I got Michael Young, and at that time, Ian Kinsler was a rookie, and Mark DeRosa, Hank Blaylock, and those guys like to lift. They like to work out, and so it was through that group that I got my start as a head strength coach, and throughout my time with the Rangers, I always had a group of guys that set the tone, and that's something that I always looked up to in the way that you always had that core group of guys that set the tone and believed in the program, and um, that's not always the case. That's not always the case in a lot of teams, but
No, those guys like that are essential. I can't tell you the number of times that Bagwell or Biggio would walk over to a player and say, hey, I've been in the weight room, the last 3 nights. We worked out in Houston. We worked out after the game because we played indoors, and that's the way the manager wanted it. And said, I didn't see you there. What's the problem? And I can remember we brought up two players from Round Rock, and we were playing the Cubs, and Jose Lima was pitching, and I think it was '99 because I think it was our first year in Minute Maid. Um, but anyway, Bagwell, he had a standard, and his standard was, I'm strong enough in my mind if I can do if I can do 3 reps with 335 pounds on the bench press. Now, you don't have to bench press to be a baseball player. I mean, Tony Gwynn said you don't have to bench 300 to hit 300. And Baggy realized that, but that was his standard. And
mhm,
so we would do it before spring training. After our off-season workout, we would do it at the end of spring training. We'd do it at the middle of the season, and then we'd do it at the end of the season. And that was his way of determining whether or not he had maintained his strength throughout the season. And so, he told me before the game, he said, hey, tonight's the night that we do it. Well, we ended up losing the game like, 10 runs. And I think Sammy Sosa hit 3 home runs, and Baggy took an offer, and the game lasted 4 hours. And so we're in the dugout, and the game's over. And I walk up to Baggy and I said, hey, Baggy, let's do this tomorrow. It's been a long day. And he said, no, he said, we've got it scheduled, and that's when we're going to do it, and make sure those kids are in there. I want them to see it. And so, I told him, I said, hey, just come in and just stand around. You don't have to say anything. And when he got under the bar, he said, I've got to get this up. I said, why? And he said, I have to set a good example for the young kids. And, that was the type of leader that he was. And I told the kids afterwards, I said, you don't have to bench, you don't have to lift 300 pounds, but, you know, he's done this after being here half a day and playing for 4 hours and taking an offer. And I said, a lot of people can't do this in December, in the off season when they've had 10 hours sleep and no travel. And that, he set us that kind of an example. We were playing the Marlins in Florida, and Preston Wilson slid into second base, and Craig Biggio had a torn ACL. And that's a Saturday night. And Sunday morning, Craig shows up at 9 o'clock on crutches and says, I want to go to the weight room and lift. And I said, why? And he said, I want to be comeback player of the year next year. And
mm,
so, it's Sunday morning. He's got a UC, he's got an ACL tear. He's going to have surgery in 2 days. And at that time, you had to walk through the Marlins clubhouse to get to their weight room.
mhm.
And you should have seen the look on the Marlins players' faces when Craig and I walked through that weight room with him on crutches, and then him sitting down, and doing upper body work. I mean, uh, the guys couldn't believe it. And the next year we had Preston as a teammate, and he told me, how impressed the Marlins players were that, Bidge was that determined.
Wow. Yeah, that's an awesome story. So I want to highlight that idea right there is every player, if you're a high school player and you're listening to this, the weight room is definitely probably one of the most important things that you can have in today's game. Every high school has a weight room. Every high school have access. There's facilities everywhere. People can afford stuff in their garage. It, it doesn't matter where you get it, but the weight room is available to you these days. So the point that I want to highlight is that every athlete needs to have a physical standard for themselves. For Bagwell, in order for him to be mentally okay, he had to bench press a certain amount of weight and do it a certain amount of times a week, and that was his standard. And throughout the season, he kept that up so that he felt he was ready for every game and that he was maintaining his strength. Many conversations that I have with kids today during the season, and I ask him, okay, how many times a week do you lift? He goes, oh, well, we didn't lift because it's I'm tired, or the game went too late, or I don't have this or I don't have that. If you want to be great, you got to develop that mindset that I am going to treat my body and I am going to have physical standards for myself that are going to let me know that I'm ready for the game. You can't let the team schedule or your weekly schedule get in the way of your physical progress, because in high school the the time goes by fast, and next thing you know you're a senior and you're still weighing 160 pounds, and then you want to be a division one player. That's probably not going to happen. um, if, Last year I was working with this kid that was I want to say a sophomore, 6 foot, 150 pounds, 160 pounds, has had several shoulder injuries, and I asked him, okay, what do you do for running? He goes, well, I don't do anything. I don't do any running. I just do some sprints. Oh, well, what do you do for lifting? Do you do squats? Do you do lift legs? And he said, no, I don't lift legs because I don't like it. And I'm like, okay, well, if you don't do any of that stuff, how do you expect to go to college? And he couldn't answer. He couldn't answer. And then the next thing I know, he went to a facility that uh, was going to teach him how to gain velocity. And I was like, well, I hope that if you go there, I hope that you're training your legs, because it's not going to work if you don't have a weight training program associated with the throwing program. And that's the kind of thing that sometimes people don't realize, the work ethic and the mindset of some of these guys that are in the big leagues. Those guys are talented, yes, they are, but the best players always have self standards that they live by. Not something that the coaches tell them to do, or their trainer tells them to do. They just set that for themselves. You have to have a standard for yourself. Otherwise, um, if you can't motivate yourself, no one can. So a lot of
I
people think it's the money, but it's not really the money. It's these guys have an inner motivation that most of us don't have.
that's true. One of the hardest things for a player to do um, when I was in the game was to walk across the field at Wrigley Field in Chicago after a game in front of the Cub fans after losing, walk into the Cub dugout and walk past the Cub
Hmm.
clubhouse into the weight room and lift.
Yeah.
Because the fans are hollering at you. You just got beat. You've been there all day, and yet that's what we did. It was consistently. Guys like Bagwell and Pence and Biggio and Altuve and the guys before them. Was after the game. You know how it is. You know, you've got 45 minutes to eat, shower, and get over the game, and yet these guys are wanting to walk across that field and take the ridicule of the Cub fans and go in. I remember one night um, we went across and some of the Cubs didn't have many players that lifted, but one of them was Sammy Sosa, and Sammy was doing a bench press, and we were standing there waiting for him to finish, and I was standing there with Ken Caminetti, and Sammy looked at Cammy and said, "You want to work in?" And Cammy said, "Sure." So Sammy handed him the 35-pound dumbbells that he was using, and Cammy took them and put them on the rack and picked up a pair of 60s. And that was his first warm-up set, was with 60 pounds. And the next day, the strength coach for the Cubs came up to me and said, listen, said, Caminetti embarrassed Sammy last night, so you guys are going to have to wait, till he gets out of the weight room to come over. And, I told Cammy, and that highlighted his day.
Yeah. These, uh, I've had funny stories like that where a player gets embarrassed and then they don't want to come back in the weight room because the other guys lift more than them, and so I've had situations like that. So that's real. That's real. Yeah. So like when you think about physical conditioning, strength training, um, one of the things also that the great players do is that they realize that the weight training and the physical training, it is to help their physical performance, but it doesn't take away from their baseball skill. Many people still believe that if you lift too much or if you do weights or you do certain things, that it's going to take away from your baseball skill. And that is further from the truth. Um, I remember one conversation that I had with Adrian Beltre where I was going to have him do something. I can't remember what it was, but I remember telling him, hey, how about we do a little bit less because I don't want it to affect your game tomorrow or tonight or whatever it was. And he's like, no, that's okay. We can do it because I, I can separate my weight training and my physical training from my baseball. I know that the weight room is not going to make me a better baseball player. It's going to keep me healthy and it's going to keep me strong, but that's not going to take away from my baseball. And many of these guys, they knew that I can bench 300 pounds and still go out there and hit 95.
Oh, absolutely. We have a saying, there are no weak fast runners. There are no weak power pitchers. There are no weak power hitters. You got to be strong to be able to do it. And you need to have your own program, and you need to have confidence in it, and you need to know, you know, when to back off and when to rest. We had a saying, work and rest are both important and neither is beneficial without the other. And I can remember times when Jose Altuve, he's only a rookie, and he comes into the weight room after the game and he said, I'm really tired. He said, but I'll do it if you want. And I said, no, there's no reason. If you're tired, there's no reason to do it and make yourself more tired. Our goal here is to make you stronger, not to make you more, not to fatigue you. So I'll see you tomorrow. And tomorrow he shows up bright and early, and does more than he would have done if he were fatigued the night before.
yeah, yeah, and that's another thing about the weight room. The weight room teaches you about your body. It helps you understand your body. Every movement that you make in the weight room is creating connections. You're telling your body to lift, to move, to stretch, to do a movement. And those people that have been very dedicated to the weight room have always been very good athletes. I've never met a guy that was a weight room guy that was a bad athlete, at least in the game. I'm talking like baseball wise. Um, one of the underappreciated concepts about being in the weight room is the coordination and ability to control your body that you develop. And that's one of the things that a lot of people still misunderstand. They only think that the weight room is just about putting on muscle and lifting heavier weights. But every time you touch a bar or you touch a dumbbell, you're gaining coordination. That's another way to get better as an athlete. Anytime that you're telling your body to do something on purpose, it carries over to anything that you do. And if I'm a young baseball player and if I look at the weight room like that, then when on the mound and I want to locate a pitch outside, and I've been in the weight room telling myself, okay, I want to squat this deep, or I want to reach with this medicine ball, or I want to do this and target this. You should be able to have that ability to say, okay, I want to locate this pitch on the outside corner. That is one of the benefits of being in the weight room. You learn how to talk to your body. Um, I can't express that enough. I every kid that I work with, I bring that up. Even in the big leagues, I brought that up many times. The weight room is not just about lifting heavy weights and making muscle. It's about gaining body control, gaining coordination, gaining the ability to tell your body to do something on purpose. And that's what the game of baseball is. You have to talk to yourself. Sometimes in game, you have to coach yourself into a situation to successfully hit the ball or locate a pitch or get an extra base or whatever. But I cannot, emphasize that enough, that the weight room teaches you about your body more than anything else that you could do outside of the field.
Well, I agree with you on that. And in the weight room, we tell them every repetition has to be perfect. And so you can't be perfect, in the weight room and not be perfect on the field. And you can't be perfect in the field and not be perfect in the weight room. So every opportunity that you provide yourself to be perfect, is going to have a positive transfer over to the field. Roger Clemens, always said that his workouts, and he nicknamed them his SEAL workout, to give you an idea how tough they were. But he said, this prepares me on the mound when I get into a tough situation. I know that I didn't give up on my conditioning program, so there's no way I'm going to give in to a hitter or to a team when I'm on the mound. There's carryover.
Yeah, I remember we had a conversation years back, and I can't remember if it was Nolan or Roger Clemens who would run a lot or do a lot of exercise before his bullpens in spring training because he wanted to come in feeling like he was in the fifth inning. He in spring training, he didn't want to be fresh or something like that.
Yeah, Roger, he did it before games. And, in a spring training game, if you've got a game at noon today, the
Mm-hmm.
pitchers don't go out until they go to the bullpen to warm
Mm-hmm.
up before the game. But Roger would show up at 9 o'clock in the morning and go through, the PFP with his teammates
Mm-hmm.
and, do all the stuff that his teammates would do, bunting and, the pitcher still hit back then, and he'd take BP and then along about an hour before game time, he would come into the weight room and do one set of every uh, strength training exercise that he was going to do, go out on the field and run 4 laps, which was the equivalent of a mile. And his goal was to finish in under 7 minutes. And then his SEAL program started. He would do 25 side to sides, which are ball pickups,
Mm-hmm.
but the ball's in the air as opposed to putting it on the ground. Stride 100 yards, jog back 75, do 50 mountain climbers, stride 100, jog back 75, do 50 power sit-ups, stride 100, jog back 75, repeat that whole process 3 times, and then long tossed, go to the mound and go to the bullpen and then go to the mound. And he did this until he was pitching 6 innings in the game. And then when the game was over, he came back and repeated the entire process again. And he said that pitchers, early in spring training, were always ahead of the hitters. And, going out there and blowing the hitters away, he got absolutely nothing out of it. So he wanted to feel like he was in the fifth or sixth inning when he took the mound to start the game, and that he had to pitch, not just overpower the hitters. And he did that until, as I said, until he would go 6 innings, and then he would do it on his bullpen day during the season.
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, he was a beast.
Yeah. No, that's that mentality is out there is far greater than most players out there. But if you're listening to this and you say to yourself, there was no way I could do that, and yes, those guys were special, and I'm not saying that we're recommending that, but I feel like there are times where you have to challenge yourself physically so that you're physically conditioned to pitch. Um, the game today obviously is bigger, faster, stronger. Most starters today last 5 innings, and everybody's okay with that. And that's the game today. But if you're a young player and you want to impress, one of the things that you need to impress people with, other than fastball velocity, which seems to be the thing these days, everything's about velocity. But I really believe that if you're an amateur player, whether high school or college, if you can impress people with your stamina, I think you will stand out more than the guys and the regular guys in today's game. Um, Heavy, like really fit pitchers. That's a thing of the past. I feel like not many guys uh, took that much time to do conditioning, or that where that in tune with their body that they wanted to feel a certain thing with their bullpens or their games. And so my challenge to you guys, high school kids, college guys, is, you know, challenge yourself. Challenge yourself. Take stories like this and realize, if I want to be excellent, or if I want to be elite, my physical fitness is something that I can impress people with, not just my fastball velocity. And so um, I hope that stories like this don't make you think that you have to do it exactly that way. But I'm hoping that when you listen to this, that you'll say, you know what, maybe perhaps I need to turn on my conditioning a little bit and do certain things to show myself physically fit, show my stamina on the mound, show that when I'm in trouble, when I have runners on base, I'm not sweating beads, I'm not turning red, I'm not huffing and puffing. I want to look like I'm fresh, I'm under control, and I just challenge you guys to listen to these stories. Take note and see what you can do in your particular situation to make yourself physically tougher. Because that's something that I believe it's kind of going away from the game today, is that physical fitness aspect of pitching. So
Yeah, Nolan said that when he was in the American League, of course, they didn't have a DH, but he prepared to pitch 11 innings. He wanted to be in the game when the decision was made, and he once pitched 13 innings and threw 243 pitches. And I think 4 or 5 times in his career, he threw, over 300 innings. I think one time he threw 335 innings, and he did it on a 4-man rotation. You know, not 5-man. He pitched every fourth day instead of every fifth day, and he passed that on to Roger, and then later he passed it on to Randy Johnson, and that was their mentality. I want to be in the game when the game ends. I don't want to put my fate in the hands of a teammate. If I start it, I'm going to finish it.
yeah, no, that's. I know sometimes people talk about old school, new school. Um, I don't really agree with that argument. I feel like if you're an athlete, you should be in the best physical shape you can be. Um, I know that the game today has changed the way that pitchers are used, but I feel like the individual pride that each athlete should have, it should be to be the best conditioned athlete you can be, not just play up to the standards of the game. You should always be trying to surpass the standards of the game. It doesn't matter if today's game accepts 5 innings. You should always, if you're a starting pitcher, you should want to go. If you're a high school guy, you should want to go all 7. You should want to be able to pitch every outing. Um, and honestly, that's not going to happen by joining a baseball school and doing a velocity program for 6 weeks and then what? Uh, I did a podcast uh, a while back about maintaining velocity. The best way to maintain velocity is you got to be physically fit. A lot of kids, a lot of people, even major league guys, they'll go to a facility for the off season, they gain a few miles an hour, and then 2 months later they've lost that fastball. Why? Because in order to maintain that fastball velocity, you have to be physically fit, and the reality is that takes a lot longer than a few months. It takes years, and it takes years of physical fitness. Takes years of disciplined conditioning, and most guys, they believe that fastball velocity is only about arm strength and body strength. It's more than that. And kids today are being fooled into thinking that the only way to throw harder is by going into these throwing programs and um, using all these gadgets and these weighted balls, and they go in a warehouse and they gain 3 or 4 miles an hour, and you're good to go. No, if you want to be good and you gain 3 miles an hour, well then keep it and stay healthy. That's the challenge. Is like, guys gain velocity, but can you keep it and stay healthy? And I think it has a lot to do with your physical fitness, because you cannot sustain that level of intensity past a few months if you're not dedicated to it.
Jose, one of my jobs with the Astros was keep the radar gun, and I kept it for 9 years that Nolan was there. And Nolan was always his fastest velocity was always his last inning, whether it was the eighth inning or the ninth inning or whatever. And the current book of world records for the fastest pitch thrown in Major League Baseball is 100.6, and that's because it was measured at home plate, not out of the pitcher's
Mm-hmm.
hand. And Nolan set the record, and he set the record in the ninth inning of a ball game, and it was the 100th pitch that he had thrown 100 miles an hour or faster in the game. That's stamina.
Yeah.
And he was still throwing 95. He was touching 95 at 47. Roger Clemens was touching 95, at 45. Randy Johnson was touching it at 95. And these guys were both, pups out of Nolan. And Roger used to say, what good does it do you to throw 95 in April or May if you're not around, when the team needs you in August and September because you're injured. So he was a big believer, as was Randy, in that you have to maintain your fitness. And Nolan said that there were three things that enabled him to pitch till he was 47 and enabled to pitch as hard as he did for as long as he did. And one of them was genetics, which he couldn't control.
Mm-hmm.
He won the lottery in that one. The second one was his conditioning. Conditioning enabled him to repeat his mechanics, as many times as needed without getting injury. And then number three was that he had perfect mechanics, that his mechanics and his delivery were such that, it put less wear and tear on his body and his arm, and his conditioning allowed him to repeat it enough times that he could control it. And those were his three go-tos.
Yeah. Yeah. And for everyone listening, okay, so you can't control genetics. That's God given. And perhaps you weren't gifted with certain mechanics. Every pitcher is different. And a lot of people will argue that there's no such thing as perfect mechanics, but I believe that there are certain people that move a certain way that put less stress on their arms. So that's one thing that I feel like is also natural. You throw the baseball the way you throw it from your early years. I've seen video of good pitchers when they were young, and their throwing motion looks very, very similar to when they were adults. So a lot of times your throwing motions, your mechanics are kind of ingrained also. But I believe that the one thing that you can do and that you can't control is your physical fitness. So always attack the things that you can change. In today's game, I feel like a lot of times pitchers spend more time trying to change mechanics, trying to change their arm angles and doing things to change their mechanics, and they forget about the benefit of the physical fitness, just because that's not measurable, and you can't really tell whether if you run a certain amount that you're going to pitch better. I mean, I get that, but the good ones, and from your experience, you had some elite pitchers that pitched for a long time, that threw very, very hard, and they were beasts. They were beasts on when it came to conditioning. So, and not only that, they took it serious. So it wasn't something that anyone made them do it. Those guys were self-motivated and they were going to grind through those sessions. And so if you're a young player, yes, work on your mechanics. Yes, work on your pitching. Do all the programs you can. Fine. I mean, that's the way of the world. But take pride in your conditioning, because in the end, that is the one thing that you can actually change and affect more than anything else. So,
I
uh,
agree, Jose. And as Nolan said, you should never get beat because the opposition was better prepared. And that meant that they were more physically fit than you were. They got more sleep than you did. Um, they ate better than you did, or that they had a more positive attitude than you did.
yeah, yeah. Obviously, we've touched on some of the players that you worked with. Um, I want to hear some of your takeaways now that you're out of the game, and you look back, and what are some of the things that impressed you the most, some of the things that you took away from those guys that you want to share. You and I have talked many times about what Nolan did and Bagwell, Biggio, and things like that, but like for the people listening, what were some of the things that you learned from Nolan? What were some of the things from Bagwell, Biggio, some of the things that if I'm a young player and I'm listening and I look up to some of those guys, and hopefully some of these guys, some of the kids today remember those names, but like talk about some of the qualities that people listening can take away. Like, you know what, Nolan did this. I think I can do that.
Well, the one thing about Nolan was in addition to his work ethics and his ability and so forth, Nolan was a good teammate. Nolan was a great teammate. I remember Dickie Thon got hit in the head like the first or second game of the season. He was an all-star. He was on his way to, becoming great, but it ended up ruining his vision, and he never recovered from it. But he would get down on himself and in his preparation while he was in rehab, and Nolan would make challenges to him. You can't do this. You can't hit 5 balls off of the tee straight up the middle, or you can't do this many push-ups, or you can't do this. And he would make these bets that he knew Dickie could accomplish. Things that he could do, and Nolan lost every one of them. And I don't think Dickie ever understood that Nolan was working with his mind.
Mm-hmm.
You know, trying to move him in the right direction. Um, I remember we went through a series where Nolan was leading the league in ERAs and strikeouts, and he had a losing record. And so he offered $100 for every RBI. And his philosophy, he told his teammates, was, "I'm not above trying to buy a victory." So he was always supporting his teammates, always trying to get them to go better. Um, Roger Clemens, when he joined the Astros, uh, we divided our pitchers into groups, and so we had a one starting pitcher, and then he had 5 pitchers under him. And Roger told his team, his 5 in the group, he said, "When we run, I'm not going to finish first because I'm 45 years old. But if I finish ahead of you, we have a problem." you know. And so guys like that were always, egging their, you know, uh, gently pushing their
Mm-hmm.
teammates to become better versions of themselves. You know, Bagwell as I said, he and Bidge were always in the weight room. If we had a pitcher or a player that maybe was um, not representing the team the best way, the GM would come to me and say, "So and so did something or another. Um, will you talk to him?" And I would go to Bagwell, Biggio, and Brad Osmus and say, "Am I doing it or are you doing it?" And they say, "We'll handle it." And the problem, went away,
Mm-hmm.
amazingly, very quickly. The guys that have influence, if they use their influence and they use it positively, they get positive results out of their teammates.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, so for everyone listening, so if you're a high school player, be a good teammate. Support your teammates. There are so many ways that you can be a leader without actually being too outspoken. everyone, the game is very hard. So if you play baseball at any level, there's going to be guys around you that are struggling, that need support, that need encouragement. Find ways to encourage your teammates. Find ways to put positive comments in their drills, or be playful, be fun around them. Find a way to make your teammates feel appreciated, because as we all know, anyone that's played the game will beat you up a little bit, and it'll beat you up mentally. And so be that guy, whether you're doing well or you're not doing well. Be that guy on your team that supports your teammates. If you see a guy that's kind of down on himself, pull him aside and say, "Hey, man, you okay? What's going on?" Talk to him. See if there's anything you can do for them. So find ways to be a good teammate. There's so many ways that you can make the game better for your teammates by just being there for them, being encouraging, being playful, being inclusive. Sometimes the guys that are struggling and nobody talks to them, and they kind of shy away from them, and they want to hang out with the guy that's doing good. Hang out with the guy that's not doing very well. Maybe take that guy out to eat, or sit with them at lunch. Uh, Try to find a way to connect with that guy that's not doing very well. Maybe there's something going on in his life that perhaps you can help with. So be a good teammate. A second thing, take pride in the way that you do your work. Um, from the stories that we've heard today, Bagwell and Biggio were the type of guys that led by example. They had self standards. Yes, they had standards that they felt were important to them. And sometimes, and in my experience, I've experienced this with some players, that really good players that have self standards, and they are admired for their talent, but they're very selfish. And as long as they meet their self standards, they don't care about anyone else. But I've also had guys that live by example, and they felt like their example meant something to the team, and they carried themselves a certain way, they dressed a certain way, they spoke a certain way, they practiced a certain way, they played the game a certain way, because they knew that it was important to them, but it was also important to the team. And they always acted in a way that they were representing something bigger than themselves. There are players, and we all know them in different sports, that they live in a way that it's all about them, all about their self standards. The good ones, in my opinion, plus the ones that people really enjoy working with and playing with, are the ones that are constantly living up to a certain standard because they want to lead by example. They're perhaps they're not going around telling people what to do. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is those guys that make decisions on a daily basis. I need to get my workout in because other people are watching, because I want to show an example to that rookie that's next to me, or I want to show an example to that guy that doesn't work very hard. And I want to be able to tell people that my success is not just because of my talent, but my success is because of my work ethic. And work ethic is something that we can all work towards. That's something that we can control. And so lead by example. Have that pride that whatever you do, you're affecting yourself, but you're affecting others. And so take that away. Be that guy on your team. Be the guy that shows up early. Be the guy that wears the uniform the right way. Be that guy that when you're playing catch, you're working on something. You're not screwing around and playing around with your teammates. Be that guy that leads by example. You don't have to speak or say anything to be a leader. Lead by example. And the last thing, just take pride. Take pride in your physical fitness. Be the most fit guy. Be the strongest guy. Be the fastest guy. You probably not gonna win every drill, or you're not gonna be the best in the weight room, but be the best physically fit baseball player you can be. Lift, run, take care of your arm, rest, eat right, sleep, arrange your schedule so that you know that you got to play tomorrow. Don't stay up playing video games. Um, you know, take pride in your physical fitness, because the good ones, just about, I'd say 99.9 of the elite Hall of Fame type players had that. They had a lifestyle that was only geared toward being the best. And so there's a lot of that we can all do, whether we are talented or not, whether you become a major leaguer or not. Take that to heart. Be the best physically fit athlete person you can be. Um, Man, this has been great. A lot of lessons, a lot of good stories. You know, Gene, you've been a mentor to me, a friend. You paved the way for a lot of strength coaches. If anyone uh, wants to be a strength coach, I hope my hope was always to grow up to be like you. That was always my goal, to grow up to be like you. And I'm grateful to be your friend, and I'm glad that after all these years, we're still friends. We're still working together. We're still putting out projects and putting out information because we love the game. We love strength and conditioning, and we love to make people better. And that's what I've always admired about you. And even at this age, you're still putting out articles and information out there to make baseball better. So I thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Hey guys, thank you for tuning in to another episode. This was awesome. I hope you all got something out of it. Stay tuned. Many great guests coming up in the next few weeks. Thanks for watching.